when the 15th tutor fled the mansion with orange juice dripping down her face, declaring that your son needs a psychiatrist, not a teacher. The billionaire father nearly broke. He had tried everything money experts threats dot, but nothing worked. The boy resolutely refused to open any book, seemingly spiraling out of control. But just as he was losing all hope, a black gardener did something no one expected. That single act changed both their lives forever. Before we move on, leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And please subscribe. Tomorrow's story is one I've been looking forward to sharing. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Callahan estate as Dr. Margaret Sullivan stormed down the marble steps, her designer blouse stained bright orange from collar to hem. Her silver hair hung in disheveled strands around her flushed face. Robert Callahan, the wealthiest businessman in the city, rushed after her. "Dr. Sullivan, please. I apologize for my son's behavior. I'll double your rate, triple it if necessary." She spun around so fast he nearly collided with her. "Mr. Callahan, in 30 years of teaching, I have worked with the children and grandchildren of 3 presidents, students with severe trauma, behavioral disorders, learning disabilities. I have never in 3 decades encountered a child like yours. What happened exactly? I'm sure we can work through this." "I asked him to open his textbook. That's all." "Open the book, Ethan. Let's begin today's lesson." Her voice trembled with barely contained rage. "And your son looked me dead in the eye, picked up his glass of orange juice, and threw it directly at my face." Robert stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Name your price. Whatever it takes." "You're not listening." Dr. Sullivan's eyes were cold. "Your son doesn't need a tutor, Mr. Callahan. He needs a psychiatrist, perhaps an entire team of them." She turned toward her black Mercedes. "Money cannot fix what's broken inside that boy. Good luck. You're going to need it." Robert stood frozen as the engine roared to life and the car disappeared down the long driveway. 15 tutors, 15 failures, each one more qualified than the last, each one leaving faster than the one before. Near the east garden, Naomi Carter, the estate's new gardener, paused her work trimming the hedges. She had heard everything: the shouting, the accusations, the desperate offers of money. She had only worked here 2 weeks, but already knew the Callahan household was not what it appeared from outside. She glanced up at the second-floor window. A boy stood there watching his father below, dark hair falling across his forehead, shoulders, rigid face completely blank. He didn't look triumphant after driving away another tutor. He didn't look defiant or angry. His eyes held nothing at all. Naomi's hands tightened on her pruning shears. She recognized that emptiness. She had seen it in her own reflection for 3 long years. That wasn't the face of a troubled teenager acting out. That was the face of someone who had stopped feeling anything. The boy's gaze drifted down and caught hers. Something flickered in his expression, surprise maybe at being observed. Then he stepped back from the window and vanished into darkness. "Not your business," Naomi told herself. "You're just the gardener. Keep your head down, save your money, stay out of trouble." Inside the mansion, Robert slammed his study door and called his secretary. "Melissa, find another tutor, immediately. The absolute best available." A pause on the other end. "Sir, Dr. Sullivan was the 15th. We've contacted every qualified candidate in the tri-state area. After what happened with the last few, word has spread. No one is willing to take the position." "Then look outside the area. Search nationally, internationally if you have to." "Mr. Callahan." His secretary's voice was careful. "With all due respect, perhaps the problem isn't finding the right tutor. Perhaps Ethan needs a different kind of help." Robert ended the call and hurled his phone onto the leather couch. His chest felt tight. 15 tutors, 15 failures. His son was slipping further away with each passing day, and he had no idea how to stop it. He sank into his chair and let his eyes drift to the photograph on the wall. Elizabeth, his late wife, her arms wrapped around 8-year-old Ethan, both of them laughing, her dark hair caught in the wind, his small face lit with pure joy. That photo was taken at the beach house the summer before her diagnosis, back when his family was whole, back when his son still smiled. "I'm losing him, Elizabeth," Robert whispered to the empty room. "Every day he pulls further away. You always knew what to say to him. You could reach him when no one else could." His voice cracked. "But you're gone, and I don't know how to be his father without you." Upstairs, Ethan sat on the edge of his bed staring at the orange juice drying on his hand. He should feel something. Guilt, satisfaction, anything. But there was only numbness, the familiar emptiness that had become his constant companion. His room was filled with everything money could buy. Gaming consoles worth thousands that he hadn't touched in months. A guitar still in its case. Shelves of books he refused to open. On his desk, textbooks sat in perfect stacks, spines, uncracked pages pristine. None of it mattered. His eyes moved to the photograph on his wall. His mother, Elizabeth, her smile gentle and warm, even in a still image. She wore the yellow sundress she loved, the one that made her look like sunshine. Ethan reached into his nightstand and pulled out a worn leather journal. The cover was soft from years of handling, edges, frayed pages yellowed. His mother had given it to him when he started first grade, filled with lessons and encouragements and little drawings in the margins. He opened to the first page and traced her familiar handwriting. "My dearest Ethan, these words will help you understand the world. Books are doors to places we've never been, to lives we've never lived. Promise me you'll keep reading, keep learning, keep growing. I love you more than all the stars. Mom." His throat constricted. He could almost hear her voice reading the words aloud, feel her hand smoothing his hair, smell the lavender perfume she always wore. He had been 10 when she got sick, 11 when she died. For those final months, he sat beside her hospital bed every day after school, reading to her because she was too weak to hold the books herself. It was their ritual, their sacred time. No matter how tired she was, no matter how much pain, she always smiled when he read. The last book they shared was The Little Prince. He had been reading chapter 23 when her hand went limp in his. He kept reading for another full page before he realized she wasn't listening anymore, that she would never listen again. He never finished that book. He never opened another one. Every time he tried, the words blurred, and all he could see was her face. All he could feel was her cold hand slipping from his grip. The pain was so sharp, so immediate, it was as if she died all over again. So he stopped trying, pushed the books away, pushed the tutors away, pushed everyone away. If learning meant remembering, then he would rather forget everything. A tear slid down his cheek. He slammed the journal back into the drawer and wiped his face roughly. Feeling nothing was better than feeling this. Outside, Naomi's phone buzzed in her pocket. She wiped her hands on her work pants and checked the screen. A message from St. Mary's Hospital. Reminder surgery slot reserved. Please complete payment within 7 days to avoid cancellation. Outstanding balance, $85,000. Her stomach dropped. $85,000. That was what stood between her mother and survival. Her mother had been diagnosed with a heart condition 8 months ago. Without surgery, the doctors gave her 2 years at most. With surgery, she could live another 20. The difference between life and death came down to money Naomi didn't have. This job paid $5,000 a month plus room and board, more than any previous position, but even saving every penny, it would take over a year. Her mother didn't have a year. Naomi closed her eyes and focused on breathing. In through the nose, hold out through the mouth. The technique her therapist taught her during those dark months after Columbia. She couldn't fall apart. Not now. Not when her mother was counting on her. When she opened her eyes, she looked up at the second-floor window again. Empty now. Something about that boy nagged at her. The hollow look in his eyes. The way he stood so still, like he was already somewhere else. She had stood like that once, 3 years ago on a bridge over the river in the middle of the night, convinced that disappearing was the only way to make the pain stop. Her mother had found her, had grabbed her arm and pulled her back from the railing. "I see you," her mother had said, voice fierce and trembling. "You are not invisible. Whatever happened, whatever they did to you, you are still here. You are still my daughter, and I will not let you go." That night had saved her life, not because the pain went away, but because someone had seen it. Someone had acknowledged that it was real. Naomi shook off the memory and returned to her weeds. That boy's problems were not her problems. His father was a billionaire. He had access to the best therapists, the best doctors, everything money could buy. She was just the gardener. She had her own mother to save. But even as she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that some wounds couldn't be healed by money, and some battles couldn't be won by strangers. 3 days had passed since the orange juice incident. 3 days of Ethan locked in his room, refusing meals, refusing conversation. Robert responded the only way he knew how, calling in more experts. Ethan pressed his ear against his bedroom door, listening to his father's voice from the study below. "Yes, Dr. Morrison, I understand the evaluation process. How thorough is this assessment?" A pause. "And if you determine he needs more intensive intervention, residential treatment." Another pause. "Military school." You think that structure could help military school? The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. They were going to send him away, lock him up with strangers who would scream in his face and force him to follow rules and pretend to be normal. He couldn't breathe. The walls pressed in on him from all sides. He had to get out. The bathroom window opened onto a ledge above the garage. He had used this escape before slipping out at night when the silence became unbearable. His hands trembled as he climbed through and dropped onto the roof. He ran, past the rose garden his mother had planted, past the fountain she chose for their anniversary, past the greenhouse where she taught him to grow tomatoes. Everything reminded him of her. Everything was a wound. He didn't stop until he reached the ancient oak tree at the far corner of the property, her favorite spot. She used to bring him here for picnics, spreading a blanket beneath the branches, reading stories while he ate sandwiches cut into stars and moons. Ethan collapsed against the massive trunk, and for the first time in months, he let himself break. The sobs came from somewhere deep inside, raw and uncontrollable, not the angry tears that came with his rages. These were different. He cried for his mother, for the father who looked at him like a problem to solve, for the boy he used to be, the one who loved books and believed the world made sense. That boy died in a hospital room 5 years ago. No one seemed to notice. Naomi was weeding the perennial beds near the oak when she heard it, a sound so broken it stopped her mid-motion. Through the branches she saw him. The Callahan boy curled against the tree's shoulders, shaking with each sob. Her first instinct was to walk away. Getting involved with the boss's son could cost her this job. Losing this job could cost her mother's life. But her feet wouldn't move. She looked down at her hands, calloused and dirt-stained now. 3 years ago, these hands typed a dissertation her professors called brilliant. 3 years ago, she was Naomi Carter Starr economics student at Columbia, full scholarship, top of her class. Then Dr. Richard Hayes stole everything. She remembered the dean's office, the accusation of plagiarism, Hayes standing beside her, voice dripping with false regret. "I'm afraid Miss Carter has been passing off my research as her own." She had begged them to check the evidence, but Hayes was a tenured professor with decades of credibility. She was just a scholarship student with no connections. They expelled her within a week. That night, she walked to the bridge, stood on the edge looking down at black water, thinking how easy it would be to let go. Her mother found her, grabbed her arm, pulled her back. "I see you," her mother said. "You are not invisible. Whatever they took from you, they cannot take this. They cannot take us." Now standing in a billionaire's garden, Naomi watched another person cry alone and felt the weight of that memory. She made a decision. She didn't approach Ethan, didn't offer comfort or platitudes. She simply walked to a patch of weeds about 15 feet away, knelt down, and began working. The only sounds were his sobs and her hands in the soil, the rustle of weeds being pulled, wind through oak leaves. Gradually his crying subsided. Shaky breaths replaced violent sobs. "What are you doing here?" His voice was hoarse, defensive. "Weeding. Did my father send you to spy on me?" "No. I work here. This is my job. I don't need anyone feeling sorry for me." "I don't feel sorry for you. I'm just weeding." Silence stretched between them. She could feel him watching, trying to figure out her angle. In his world, everyone wanted something. She just kept pulling weeds. Finally, his voice came again, smaller. "Have you ever wanted to just disappear?" Naomi's hand stilled. She turned to look at him directly. His eyes were red and swollen face, blotchy hair, a mess. He looked nothing like the cold boy from the window. He looked exactly like what he was, a child in unbearable pain. "Yes," she said, "every day for 3 years." He stared at her. Adults always lied to him, told him everything would be fine. No one ever admitted to feeling the same darkness. "Why didn't you disappear?" "Because someone needed me. My mother is very sick. If I disappeared, she would be alone." Naomi paused. "When I was at my lowest, she found me. She said 5 words I'll never forget. 'I see you. You're not invisible.' That was enough to make me stay." Ethan wiped his nose with his sleeve. "My mom used to say stuff like that." "Used to? She's dead. 5 years ago. I'm sorry. Everyone says that. Sorry doesn't bring her back." "No, it doesn't." He looked at her with surprise. Most adults rush to fill silence with empty comfort. She just sat with the truth. "How long does it still hurt?" he asked. "I don't know if it stops, but it changes. Becomes something you carry instead of something that crushes you." He was quiet, processing this. Then, she was a teacher before she married my dad. She taught me to read, taught me to love books, made learning feel like an adventure. Naomi shifted slightly closer. Tell me about her. The words tumbled out, things he hadn't told anyone in 5 years. She got sick when I was 9. Cancer. I sat with her every day after school reading to her. She was too tired to hold the books, so I did it. His voice cracked. She died while I was reading. We were in the middle of The Little Prince. I never finished it. He stared up at the oak branches, blinking rapidly. I can't read anymore. Every time I open a book, I see her face. I hear her voice. It hurts so much I can't breathe. So I stopped. Pushed away the books. Pushed away the tutors. If learning means remembering, I'd rather forget everything. Naomi understood then. This boy didn't hate learning. He hated the pain that learning awakened. Every textbook dragged him back to hospital rooms and final moments and grief he had never processed. That's why you push everyone away, she said softly. He nodded, tears spilling fresh. Everyone thinks I'm broken, that I need to be fixed. Therapists, tutors, doctors, they look at me and see a problem. You're not broken, Ethan. You're grieving. There's a difference. No one had ever said that to him. Every expert saw behaviors to correct, symptoms to treat. None considered that maybe he was just a boy who missed his mother. My dad wants to send me to military school, he whispered. I heard him on the phone. He thinks discipline will fix me. What do you think? I think he wants to get rid of me, ship me away, and forget I exist. Do you really believe that? Ethan picked at the bark of the oak tree. I don't know. My mom was the only one who made me feel like I mattered. Without her, my dad doesn't know what to do with me. He just throws money at everything. Tutors, therapists, like writing checks can replace her. Naomi pulled off her gloves. I lost everything 3 years ago. Not a person, but my future. Everything I worked for was stolen by someone I trusted. She met his eyes. For a long time, I wanted to disappear too, but my mother refused to give up on me, even when I pushed her away, even when I was cruel. She kept showing up. What changed? I realized staying wasn't about me. It was about her. Sometimes the reason to keep going isn't for yourself. It's for the people who still need you. Ethan considered this. No one needs me. Are you sure? He didn't answer, but something in his expression shifted, a crack in the wall he had built. Will you be here tomorrow? He asked. I work here every day. Could I come talk to you again if I need to? Naomi hesitated. She knew she should say no, maintain professional distance, protect her job, her mother's surgery fund, but she couldn't turn him away. I'll be here. She stood and brushed dirt from her knees. And Ethan, whatever happens, remember this. You are not invisible. Someone sees you. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he stood and walked back toward the mansion steps, steadier than before. Naomi watched him go, heart heavy with the weight of what she had done. She had gotten involved, opened a door that would be hard to close, but some connections couldn't be explained by logic. Some bonds formed because two broken pieces recognized each other in the wreckage. Maybe she could help him find his way back, the same way her mother had helped her. The next morning, Ethan found himself walking toward the garden without knowing why. He spotted Naomi kneeling beside a row of rose bushes, carefully examining the leaves. He sat down on the grass a few feet away, saying nothing, just watching. Naomi didn't acknowledge him at first. She continued her work, pruning dead branches, checking the soil. After several minutes, she spoke without looking up. You see this rose bush? Ethan glanced over. The plant was withered leaves, brown and curling. It's dead. Do you know why? No. Naomi sat back on her heels. The previous gardener loved roses, watered them 3 times a day, fertilized them every week, fussed over them constantly. She snapped off a brittle branch. She drowned them with love. Sometimes caring too much can kill the thing you're trying to protect. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Is that supposed to mean something? Your mother taught you to love learning, but after she died, that love became pain. So you avoided it. Naomi looked at him directly. You're not running from books, Ethan. You're running from her memory. His jaw tightened. What do you know about it? I know because I did the same thing. She turned back to the roses. I used to love economics, spent years studying it, dreaming about it. Then someone destroyed that dream. For a long time, I couldn't even hear the word without feeling sick. What changed? I realized that avoiding what I loved didn't make the pain go away. It just meant I lost something beautiful on top of everything else. She pulled another dead branch and tossed it aside. Your mother gave you a gift. Don't let the pain steal it from you. Ethan pulled at the grass beside him, tearing small blades and letting them fall. He didn't respond, but he didn't leave either. Naomi stood and brushed dirt from her knees. "You hate math, right?" "Hate is a weak word for how I feel about math." She almost smiled. "Come here. I need help with something." "I'm not doing homework." "It's not homework. I need to figure out how many flowers to plant in this bed. If I get it wrong, I'll order too many or too few, and Mr. Callahan will have my head, maybe even fire me." She shrugged. "I really can't afford to lose this job." Ethan hesitated, then pushed himself up reluctantly. "Fine. What do you need?" Naomi handed him a measuring tape. "Measure the length and width. Then we'll figure out spacing." "This is math. This is gardening. The math is just a tool." She pointed at the empty flower bed. 12 inches between each plant. Go." Ethan measured the bed. 8 feet by 4 feet. Naomi guided him through converting feet to inches, calculating area, dividing by spacing requirements. No worksheets, no lectures, no disappointed sighs when he made mistakes. Just a practical problem that needed solving. When he arrived at the answer, 32 plants, he stared at the number with genuine surprise. "That actually made sense," he said slowly. "Math always makes sense when you're using it for something real. Those tutors your dad hired, they gave you abstract problems with no connection to anything. Of course you hated it. They made me feel stupid." "You're not stupid. You just learn differently." Naomi handed him a trowel. "Now help me dig. These holes won't make themselves." Over the following weeks, the garden became their classroom. Naomi never called it teaching. She called it, "Help me with this." Mixing fertilizer at the correct ratio became a lesson in fractions. If the bag says 1 part fertilizer to 4 parts water and I need 2 gallons total, how much of each? Predicting how tall the sunflowers would grow, introduce graphing. They grow about 2 inches per week. Draw me a chart showing how tall they'll be in 6 weeks. Calculating water needs based on weather forecasts taught him variables. If it rains half an inch, I can skip watering. If it's over 90 degrees, I need to double the usual amount. Figure out this week's schedule. Ethan learned without realizing he was learning, and somewhere along the way, he started to enjoy it. One afternoon, while they were planting tulip bulbs, he asked, "Where did you learn all this?" "Not just gardening. The way you explain things make everything connect." Naomi's hands paused in the soil. "I went to college, studied economics at Columbia." "Columbia, that's one of the best schools in the country. Full scholarship. I worked very hard for it." Ethan sat back confused. "Then why are you digging in the dirt for my dad? No offense, but that seems like a waste." Naomi was silent for a long moment. Her fingers curled around a tulip bulb, gripping it tightly. "Sometimes life doesn't go the way you plan," she said finally. "Sometimes people in power take things from you, and there's nothing you can do about it." "What do you mean, what happened?" She shook her head slowly. "It doesn't matter anymore. Ancient history." "It's not ancient history if it still hurts." The observation caught her off guard. She looked at him, this 15-year-old boy who understood pain better than most adults. "You're right," she admitted. "It still hurts. But talking about it won't change anything. The people who did it are still out there living their lives while she gestured at the garden around them. "I'm here. That's not fair." "No, it's not." She handed him a bulb. "Plant this one 6 inches deep. Don't break the roots." Ethan wanted to push further, but something in her expression stopped him. A shadow had passed over her face, the same kind of shadow he saw in his own mirror sometimes. He planted the bulb without another word. From his study window on the 2nd floor, Robert Callahan watched his son kneeling in the dirt beside the gardener. They were laughing about something Ethan's face animated in a way Robert hadn't seen in years. He had been watching them for weeks now. At first, he thought it was just a phase. Ethan going outside, getting fresh air, maybe learning some discipline through manual labor. But this was different. They weren't just working together. They were talking, sharing, connecting. His son looked at that gardener with the same trust he used to reserve for Elizabeth. It made Robert uneasy. That evening, he found an opportunity. Naomi was putting away tools in the shed when he approached. "Miss Carter, a word." Naomi turned surprised. In 2 months of working here, Robert Callahan had never spoken to her directly. "Of course, Mr. Callahan." Robert kept his tone neutral, businesslike. "I've noticed you've been spending quite a bit of time with my son. He comes to the garden while I work. I hope that's not a problem." "That depends." Robert studied her face. "What exactly do you two talk about? Plants mostly? Math sometimes?" He helps me calculate things, figure out spacing and measurements. Naomi met his gaze steadily. He's a bright kid. He just needed someone to show him that learning doesn't have to be painful. And you took it upon yourself to show him that. I didn't plan it, sir. It just happened. Robert was quiet for a moment. Miss Carter, I appreciate that Ethan seems calmer lately, but I need to be clear about something. You are an employee of this household. My son is not your friend, not your project, not your responsibility. The words stung, but Naomi kept her expression neutral. I understand, sir. Do you? Robert stepped closer. I don't know anything about your background, Miss Carter. Where you came from, what brought you here. Frankly, it's not my concern as long as you do your job. But my son has been through a great deal. He's vulnerable. I won't have him getting attached to someone who might not be here tomorrow. I'm not going anywhere, Mr. Callahan. I need this job. Everyone says that until they find something better. Robert's voice softened slightly, almost imperceptibly. Just remember your place, for both your sakes. He turned and walked back to the house, leaving Naomi standing alone in the fading light. She understood his warning. She even respected it in a way. He was protecting his son, or trying to. That was more than many parents did. But what Robert Callahan didn't understand was that Ethan wasn't the only one who needed this connection. For the first time in 3 years, Naomi felt like she mattered to someone, like her existence made a difference. She couldn't give that up, not even for the man who signed her paychecks. 6 weeks after their first garden conversation, Ethan burst through the gate, waving a piece of paper above his head. Naomi, Naomi. She looked up from the hydrangeas, startled. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. He skidded to a stop in front of her breathless face, flushed with excitement. Look! He thrust the paper into her hands. A math test. At the top, written in red ink, 78%. It's not an A, he said quickly, but it's passing. Actually passing. I've never passed a math test in my entire life. Naomi stared at the grade, then at his beaming face. Ethan, this is wonderful. You did this. You taught me. No, she handed the test back. You did this. I just showed you that math isn't the enemy. That's the same thing. It's really not. I can show someone a door. Walking through it is up to them. She smiled. You walked through. Ethan looked at the paper again, running his finger over the grade, like he couldn't believe it was real. 15 tutors. My dad hired 15 tutors, and none of them taught me anything. They talked at me, gave me worksheets, told me I wasn't trying hard enough. He looked up at her, eyes bright. You never made me feel stupid. You never acted like I was broken. You just saw me. Naomi's throat tightened. That's because you're not broken, Ethan. You never were. Neither are you. The words hit her harder than he could have known. She blinked rapidly, turning away to hide the tears, threatening to spill. Then Ethan did something that surprised them both. He stepped forward and hugged her. For a moment, Naomi froze. Physical affection had become foreign to her over the past 3 years. But then she felt his shoulders shaking slightly, and she understood. This wasn't just about a math test. She wrapped her arms around him and held on. He was 15 years old, but in that moment, he felt like the child he had never been allowed to be. The child who lost his mother too young and never learned how to grieve. Thank you, he whispered, for everything. Naomi closed her eyes. Her mother's words echoed in her memory. Sometimes what people need isn't money or solutions. Sometimes they just need someone to see them. She had seen Ethan, and somehow, impossibly, he had seen her too. From his study window, Robert watched them embrace. His first instinct was to go down there to separate them, to remind them both of the boundaries he had set. But something stopped him. Ethan was crying. Not the angry, destructive tears Robert had grown accustomed to, but something different, something that looked almost like healing. Robert turned away from the window and sat heavily in his chair. Maybe he had been wrong about the gardener. Maybe boundaries weren't what his son needed after all. Or maybe he was making a mistake that would cost them all dearly. Only time would tell. The black Maybach pulled into the Callahan driveway on a Thursday afternoon. Naomi was watering the flower beds near the entrance when the car door opened. A man stepped out. Expensive suit, silver cufflinks, the confident stride of someone who owned every room he entered. Dr. Richard Hayes, former professor of economics at Columbia University, current chief strategy officer of Callahan Industries. Naomi's watering can slipped from her fingers. For a moment, she thought she was hallucinating. 3 years of nightmares, 3 years of looking over her shoulder, 3 years of wondering when her past would catch up with her. And now, here he was, 20 feet away, straightening his tie like he hadn't destroyed her life. Hayes walked toward the front door, his shoes crunching on the gravel. Naomi stood frozen among the flowers, unable to move, unable to breathe. 3 years ago, she had stood in a disciplinary hearing while this man performed his greatest act. The memory crashed over her like a wave. "I'm deeply troubled to be here today," Hayes had told the committee, his voice heavy with practiced regret. "Naomi was one of my most promising students. I mentored her, supported her, helped her develop her research skills. To discover that she betrayed that trust." He had shaken his head sadly, the picture of a wounded teacher. "She submitted a dissertation that was 95% identical to my own research I had been developing for years. When I confronted her privately, she became hostile, made wild accusations. I had no choice but to report the violation." Naomi had leaped to her feet. "He's lying. I wrote every word of that dissertation. He was my advisor. I sent him my drafts for feedback, and he stole them." The committee chair had frowned. "Miss Carter, please control yourself. Check the timestamps on my files. I can prove I wrote this before he published anything." Hayes had produced a folder. "I anticipated this accusation. Here are the original documents showing my research predates her submission by several months." He slid papers across the table. "I also have emails where she requested access to my materials allegedly for reference purposes." The emails were real. She had requested materials as any graduate student would from their advisor, but the timestamps had been altered, the metadata had been manipulated, and she had no way to prove it. "This is fabricated," she said desperately. "Please let me access the university system. I can show you my original files, the creation dates, the revision history." "Miss Carter," the committee chair's voice was cold, "Dr. Hayes has provided substantial evidence. Your accusations against a tenured faculty member with 20 years of exemplary service are not helping your case. But there's a signature. In my work on page 47, there's a deliberate error that I always include as a personal mark. If he truly wrote this research, he would know what it is and why it's there." Hayes had smiled sadly. "More desperate fabrications. She's clearly willing to say anything to avoid consequences." The committee hadn't even considered her claim. They didn't let her access the files. They didn't ask Hayes about page 47. They simply accepted the word of a respected professor over a scholarship student with no connections and no power. She was expelled within a week. Now that same professor stood on the front steps of the Callahan mansion, reaching for the door handle. Something made him pause, some instinct, some prickling awareness of being watched. He turned around. Their eyes met. Hayes's confident expression flickered. Confusion crossed his face, then recognition, then something that looked almost like fear. "No," he whispered, "that's not possible." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The afternoon sun cast sharp shadows across the gravel driveway. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out. Then Hayes turned abruptly and disappeared inside. Naomi's legs gave out. She sank down onto the edge of the flower bed, her hands trembling, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. He knew she was here. He had seen her face, recognized her despite the 3 years and the gardener's clothes and the dirt under her fingernails. And a man like Richard Hayes didn't leave loose ends. That evening, the head housekeeper found Naomi in the equipment shed organizing tools with shaking hands. "Miss Carter, Mr. Callahan wants to see you in his study, immediately." Naomi closed her eyes. So it was happening. Faster than she had expected, she walked to the main house like a condemned prisoner approaching the gallows. Each step felt heavier than the last. By the time she reached Robert's study, her legs were barely holding her up. Robert sat behind his massive desk, his expression unreadable. He didn't invite her to sit. "Miss Carter," he began without preamble, "I'll be direct. Dr. Hayes has informed me about your history." Naomi's hands clenched at her sides. "What did he tell you?" "That you were expelled from Columbia 3 years ago for plagiarism, that you stole his research and attempted to pass it off as your own dissertation." Robert's voice was cold, clinical. He expressed concern that someone with your background is working in my home around my son. "And you believed him?" "Without question." "I'm giving you a chance to explain yourself." Naomi took a breath, steadying herself. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind, imagined what she would say if she ever had to defend herself again. "Mr. Callahan, I did not plagiarize anything. Dr. Hayes was my faculty advisor. I spent 2 years developing my dissertation under his supervision. I sent him every draft, every revision, every piece of research I produced. That's what students do with their advisors. And 3 weeks before my defense, he published my research under his own name. Then he accused me of stealing from him. Her voice cracked slightly. He had the power, the reputation, and the connections. I had nothing. No one believed me. Robert leaned back in his chair. Dr. Hayes showed me documentation, emails, timestamps, academic records. The evidence against you was substantial. The evidence was fabricated. The timestamps were altered. The emails were taken out of context. Naomi stepped closer to the desk. Mr. Callahan, there's something he doesn't know about, something that proves I wrote that research. What? On page 47, there's a deliberate error in one of the formulas, a small notation mistake that doesn't affect the final result, but it's technically incorrect. She met his eyes. My mother was a math teacher. She taught me to always sign my work with a hidden detail that only I would recognize, in case anyone ever tried to claim it as their own. Robert frowned. You're saying you intentionally included an error? Yes. Every major paper I've ever written has one, a different detail each time, but always there. Naomi's voice grew stronger. If Dr. Hayes truly wrote that research, he would know exactly what error exists on page 47. He would know why it's there and why it doesn't affect the results. Ask him. Silence filled the room. Robert studied her face, searching for signs of deception. That's an interesting claim, he said finally. But you could have fabricated this signature story after the fact, created it as a defense after you were caught. I could have, but I didn't. Naomi held his gaze. You're a businessman, Mr. Callahan. You evaluate people for a living. Look at me. Look at your son. Look at what's happened over the past 2 months. What does Ethan have to do with this? Everything. I've spent hours with him every day, teaching him, talking with him, helping him. Does that seem like the behavior of a fraud, a thief? She shook her head. Doctor, Hayes has known about me for one afternoon, and he's already trying to destroy me. What does that tell you? Robert was quiet for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of doubt, of uncertainty. Then it hardened again. Miss Carter, I've known Richard Hayes for 8 years. He has been instrumental in building my company. His judgment has never failed me. He stood. I cannot have someone with your history working in my home. I'm sorry, but your employment is terminated. The words landed like hammer blows. Mr. Callahan, please. Naomi heard the desperation in her own voice and hated it. I need this job. My mother is sick. She needs surgery, and I'm the only one who can. I'm sorry about your circumstances, but my decision is final. Robert pressed a button on his desk phone. Security will escort you to collect your belongings. You have until morning to leave the property. Naomi stood frozen. The room seemed to tilt around her, the walls closing in. 3 years ago, she had lost everything because no one would listen. Now it was happening again. She left without another word. There was nothing left to say. Outside, the night air felt cold against her skin. She walked past the garden she had tended for 2 months, past the roses she had nursed back to health, past the oak tree where she had first truly connected with Ethan, all of it gone. At the gate, she pulled out her phone and dialed the hospital with numb fingers. St. Mary's Cardiology Unit. This is Naomi Carter. I'm calling about my mother, Grace Carter. The surgery scheduled for 2 weeks from now. Yes, Miss Carter. Have you been able to secure the payment? Naomi closed her eyes. $10,000 saved, $75,000 still needed, and now no job, no income, no hope. I'm still working on it. Miss Carter, I understand this is difficult, but without the payment, we cannot hold the surgical slot. If payment isn't received within 7 days, we'll have to release the reservation. Please, is there any way to extend the deadline, any program that might help? I can transfer you to our financial assistance office, but I should tell you the wait list for aid is several months long. Several months. Her mother didn't have several months. Naomi ended the call. She sank down onto the curb outside the estate gates, the cold concrete biting through her jeans. Everything she had built over the past 3 years, the careful reconstruction of her shattered life, the slow, painful process of learning to hope again, gone in a single afternoon because Richard Hayes had walked through the wrong door, or maybe the right door from his perspective. Now there was no one left who could challenge his stolen success, no witness to his crime working in the home of his employer. He had won again. Naomi wrapped her arms around herself and let the tears come, great heaving sobs that tore through her chest and left her gasping for air. In the darkness alone on a cold sidewalk, she had never felt more invisible. Morning light filtered through the garden, but something was wrong. Ethan knew it the moment he stepped outside. Naomi's tools were missing. Her gloves, usually draped over the fence post, were gone. The watering can sat empty and abandoned by the shed door. He found the head housekeeper in the kitchen. "Where's Naomi?" The woman looked up from her clipboard. "Miss Carter was terminated last night." "What? Why?" "I'm not privy to the details. Something about her past, I believe. Dr. Hayes brought some concerns to your father's attention." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. Hayes. Of course it was Hayes. He had met the man several times at company functions, always trailing behind his father like an expensive shadow. There was something about Hayes that made Ethan's skin crawl. The way he smiled without warmth, the way his eyes calculated every interaction like a transaction. And now Hayes had taken away the only person who actually understood him. Ethan didn't walk to his father's study. He ran. He burst through the door without knocking, not caring about the startled look on Robert's face. "You fired her. You fired Naomi because of what Hayes said." Robert set down his pen. "Ethan, this doesn't concern you." "The hell it doesn't. She's my friend." "Watch your language." "My language?" Ethan laughed bitterly. "You just destroyed someone's life based on a lie, and you're worried about my language." "It wasn't a lie. She was expelled from Columbia for plagiarism. Dr. Hayes was the victim of her theft. I couldn't allow someone with that history to continue working here." "She didn't steal anything. Hayes is the thief." Robert's expression hardened. "And how would you know that? Did she tell you her version of events?" "No. She barely talked about it, but I know her. I've spent every day with her for 2 months. She's not a liar. She's not a cheat. She's the most honest person I've ever met." "Ethan." Robert stood and walked around his desk. "I understand you've grown attached to her, but you're 15 years old. You don't have the experience to judge someone's character based on a few weeks of gardening together. And you do. You judged her based on one conversation with Hayes. I judged her based on evidence, documentation, academic records." "Did you ask her side of the story?" Robert hesitated. "I gave her an opportunity to explain." "And then you fired her anyway." Ethan shook his head. "You didn't investigate. You didn't look for proof. You just took his word because he's rich and important, and she's nobody." "That's not fair." "It's exactly what happened." Ethan slammed his hands on his father's desk. "You always do this. You throw money at problems until they go away, or you throw people away when they become inconvenient. Mom was the only one who actually cared about people, and when she died, you just—" He stopped, choking on the words. Robert's face had gone pale. "Ethan." "Forget it." Ethan turned toward the door. "I'll prove it myself. I'll prove she's innocent, and you're wrong. And Hayes is the liar everyone should be scared of." "Ethan, wait." But he was already gone. Back in his room, Ethan sat at his computer and forced himself to think clearly. Crying wouldn't help Naomi. Screaming at his father wouldn't help Naomi. For once in his life, he needed to be smart. He typed into the search bar, "Naomi Carter Columbia plagiarism." The results loaded slowly. A few articles from student newspapers. A brief mention in an academic integrity database. The story was small, buried barely a footnote. He read everything he could find. The details painted a simple picture. Graduate student steals research from faculty advisor, gets caught, gets expelled. Open and shut. But Ethan knew that picture was wrong. He thought back to 2 nights ago. He hadn't been able to sleep, so he had wandered downstairs for water. His father's study door had been cracked open, voices drifting into the hallway. He had crept closer, curious. "On page 47, there's a deliberate error in one of the formulas," Naomi's voice tight with desperation. "My mother taught me to sign my work, a hidden detail that only I would recognize." "You could have fabricated this signature after the fact," his father had replied. "I could have, but I didn't." Ethan hadn't understood at the time, but now, sitting at his computer, the pieces started to connect. He searched for Hayes's published research, the paper that had supposedly been stolen by Naomi. It took him nearly an hour to find a publicly available version buried in an academic database behind paywalls and registration requirements. But eventually, he found it. He scrolled to page 47, his heart pounding. There, in the middle of a complex economic formula, a notation that looked slightly off. He wasn't good enough at advanced math to know if it was truly an error, but it was different from the surrounding notation. Unusual. If Hayes had actually written this paper, he would have caught that. He would have fixed it. No legitimate researcher would intentionally leave a mistake in published work, unless he didn't know it was there, unless he had stolen the paper from someone who put it there deliberately. Ethan's fingers flew across the keyboard. He searched for other papers by Hayes, anything published before the Columbia scandal. He found articles going back 20 years, a solid body of academic work. He opened them one by one, scanning the formulas, looking for the same pattern, the same deliberate imperfection. Nothing. Every equation in Hayes's earlier work was clean, precise, exactly what you would expect from a tenured professor. The signature appeared only once, in the paper that Naomi claimed was hers. Ethan sat back, his mind racing. It wasn't proof that would hold up in court, but it was something. He needed more. He pulled up his father's company network using the login credentials Robert had given him years ago for emergencies. "In case you ever need to reach me and my phone is off," his father had said. Ethan had never used it until now. The system was surprisingly easy to navigate. Personnel files, financial records, company communications, all organized in neat digital folders. Within 20 minutes, he had located Hayes's employee file. Hired 8 years ago as Chief Strategy Officer, PhD from Columbia. Impressive publication record. Ethan scrolled to the supporting documents. Reference letters, background checks, and there a copy of the sample research Hayes had submitted during the hiring process. The submission date made Ethan's breath catch. 3 weeks. Hayes had submitted this research exactly 3 weeks after Naomi was expelled from Columbia. If he had truly written it himself, why wait? Why not publish it earlier when he could have established clear ownership? Why submit it for a job application almost immediately after the only person who could challenge him was silenced because it wasn't his, because he didn't have it until he stole it? Ethan printed everything. The timeline, the page 47 anomaly, the pattern analysis. His hands trembled as he organized the documents into a folder. Then he went back to his father's study. Robert looked up with exhaustion on his face. "Ethan, I really don't want to fight again. I'm not here to fight." Ethan walked to the desk and set down the folder. "I'm here to show you something." "What is this?" "Evidence. Real evidence, not just Hayes's word." Robert opened the folder with visible reluctance. Ethan walked him through everything piece by piece. "This is the research Hayes claims is his. Look at page 47. See that notation? It's wrong. The symbol should be different, but the result still works because of the specific parameters being used. So it's a typo. Hayes doesn't make typos. Look at these." Ethan spread out printouts from Hayes's earlier papers, 20 years of publications. Every formula is perfect. He's meticulous. Obsessive even. Robert frowned, studying the documents. "Now look at the timeline." Ethan pointed to the hiring records. "Hayes submitted this research to your company 3 weeks after Naomi was expelled." 3 weeks. If he had been working on this for years, like he claimed, why didn't he publish it earlier? Why wait until the only person who could challenge him was gone? That's circumstantial. Maybe. But here's the thing. Ethan met his father's eyes. If Hayes really wrote this research, he would know about the error on page 47. He would know why it's there and why it doesn't break the formula. Ask him. Robert was quiet for a long moment. "If he can explain it, I'll drop this." Ethan continued. "I'll apologize. I'll never mention Naomi again. But if he can't, if he doesn't even know the error exists, then you fired an innocent woman and you've been trusting a thief for 8 years. Robert looked at his son, really looked perhaps for the first time in years. This wasn't the angry, broken boy who threw orange juice at tutors and refused to open books. This was someone who had done research, analyzed evidence, built a logical case. This was someone who cared enough about another person to fight for them. "How did you find all this?" Robert asked quietly. "I used my brain. Turns out it works pretty well when someone believes in me." Ethan's voice softened. "Naomi believed in me. She saw something in me that 15 tutors and a dozen therapists missed. She deserves someone who believes in her, too." Robert stared at the folder for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. "Melissa, get Dr. Hayes on the line. Tell him I need him in my office tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Non-negotiable." He ended the call and looked at his son. "We'll see who's telling the truth." The conference room on the top floor of the Callahan mansion had never felt so cold. Morning light streamed through the tall windows, but it did nothing to warm the tension hanging in the air. Robert sat at the head of the long mahogany table, a folder of documents spread before him. He had spent the entire night reviewing everything Ethan had gathered, cross-referencing dates, analyzing patterns, preparing questions. His secretary had called Hayes at 7 in the morning. "Mr. Callahan needs you at the residence immediately." He didn't say why. Hayes arrived at 9 sharp, his usual confident stride only slightly hesitant as he entered the room. "Robert, what's this about? Your secretary sounded urgent." "Sit down, Richard." Hayes took a seat across from Robert, adjusting his tie. "Is there a problem with the quarterly projections? I can explain the variance in the Asian markets if that's what this is about." "This isn't about projections." The door opened again. Hayes turned, and for just a fraction of a second, his composure cracked. Naomi stood in the doorway, escorted by the head of household security. She looked as confused as Hayes was, trying not to appear nervous. "Mr. Callahan," Naomi's voice was uncertain. "I was told you wanted to see me. I thought I was supposed to leave the property this morning. Please sit down, Miss Carter." Robert gestured to a chair at the opposite end of the table from Hayes. Naomi walked slowly to her seat, her eyes meeting Hayes's. The man who had destroyed her life was already recovering his composure, his expression shifting to one of concerned professionalism. "Robert, I really must protest," Hayes said smoothly. "I explained to you about this woman's history. Having her here is highly inappropriate." "I'll decide what's appropriate in my own home, Richard." Hayes's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, I just want to make sure you're protected from any potential manipulation." "How thoughtful of you." Robert opened the folder in front of him. "Richard, I have some questions about your research, the paper you submitted when you applied to work for my company 8 years ago." "Certainly. I'm always happy to discuss my work." Hayes leaned back, relaxed, confident. "What would you like to know?" "Page 47. There's an error in one of the formulas." Hayes didn't miss a beat. "An error I find that hard to believe. My work has been thoroughly peer-reviewed by some of the top minds in the field. But please show me what you found. I'm sure there's a simple explanation." Robert slid a printed page across the table. "This notation. It's technically incorrect, though it doesn't affect the final result. Can you explain why you left it there?" Hayes studied the page with furrowed brows, the picture of a dedicated academic examining a puzzle. I see what you're referring to. This is actually a stylistic choice common in certain economic frameworks. The notation appears non-standard, but within the parameters of my analysis, it functions perfectly well." "So you're saying you wrote it that way intentionally?" "Absolutely." Hayes nodded confidently. "It's a technique I developed during my doctoral work. Allows for greater flexibility in certain calculations." Robert's expression remained neutral. "Interesting, because I had my team review every publication you've produced over the past 20 years, Richard." For the first time, something flickered in Hayes's eyes. "You did what?" "Every formula, every equation, every notation. 20 years of your work." Robert pulled out another stack of papers. "And this technique you mentioned, it doesn't appear anywhere else, not once in 2 decades of publications." Hayes's smile became strained. "Well, I don't use it in every paper. It's situational. Depends on the specific research context. So in 20 years of work, this one paper is the only situation that called for this technique." "Academic research is complex, Robert. Not everything follows predictable patterns." "Speaking of patterns," Robert spread more documents across the table. "This research was submitted to my company 3 weeks after Naomi Carter was expelled from Columbia. 3 weeks. If you had been developing this work for years, as you claimed, why did you wait until after her expulsion to use it?" Hayes laughed, but it came out slightly forced. "You're not seriously suggesting a connection. The timing is pure coincidence. I had been sitting on this research for months, waiting for the right opportunity. Your company happened to have an opening at that time." "Months?" Robert raised an eyebrow. "At the disciplinary hearing, you testified that you had been developing this research for years. Now it was months." Hayes's jaw tightened. "Years of preliminary work, months of final refinement. I misspoke. The timeline is complex." "It certainly seems to be." Robert turned to Naomi. "Miss Carter, you mentioned something when we spoke 2 nights ago. A signature. A deliberate error you include in your work. Tell us about it." Hayes cut in before Naomi could speak. Robert, you can't possibly be entertaining this woman's fantasies. She's a convicted plagiarist, desperately trying to salvage her reputation by making wild accusations. I wasn't convicted of anything, Naomi said quietly. I was expelled based on your lies. There she goes again. Hayes threw up his hands in theatrical exasperation. This is exactly what I warned you about, Robert. She's manipulative. She'll say anything to shift blame onto innocent people. Then you have nothing to worry about, Robert said calmly. Answer my questions and we'll clear this up. I've answered your questions. The notation is an intentional technique. The timing is coincidental. This woman is lying just as she lied 3 years ago. Hayes stood adjusting his jacket. Frankly, Robert, I'm insulted that you're giving her accusations any credibility after 8 years of loyal service to your company. Sit down, Richard. I'm not finished. Hayes hesitated, then slowly lowered himself back into his chair. Fine, but I want it on record that I find this entire proceeding offensive. Noted. Robert turned back to Naomi. Miss Carter, the signature. Naomi took a breath, steadying herself. My mother was a math teacher. When I was young, she taught me something she called signing your work, a small detail hidden in plain sight that only the creator would recognize. Fabrication, Hayes muttered. She's making this up as she goes. Naomi continued ignoring him. The notation on page 47 looks wrong to anyone who examines it closely, but within the specific parameters of that analysis, it produces valid results. It's a quirk of the mathematical framework. I developed something only the person who created the research would understand. Convenient, Hayes said with a sneer. She's had 3 years to concoct this story. Of course, she has an explanation ready. Robert looked at Hayes. Then explain it yourself. Excuse me, you said the notation was an intentional technique you developed, so explain it. Tell me exactly what the error is, why you included it, and why it still produces valid results within the framework. Hayes's confident expression flickered. I already told you, it's a stylistic choice that allows for flexibility in calculations. That's not an explanation, that's a deflection. Robert leaned forward. If you truly wrote this research, you should be able to explain every line of it in detail. So explain page 47, specifically. This is ridiculous. Hayes's voice rose slightly. You're asking me to recall the specific reasoning behind one notation in a paper I wrote 8 years ago. No one could do that. I could, Naomi said. Hayes whirled on her. Of course you could, because you've spent 3 years obsessing over this, crafting your lies, perfecting your story. That doesn't prove anything except that you're a dedicated con artist. Then let's test it. Robert pulled out his phone. I have a mathematics professor from MIT on standby. I'm going to send him page 47 and ask him to evaluate whether the notation is a legitimate academic technique or a deliberate error that happens to work within specific parameters. Hayes's face went pale. That's not necessary. I think it is. Robert began typing on his phone. Robert, wait. Hayes held up his hand, his composure cracking. Let's not involve outside parties. This is a private matter. A moment ago, you were confident there was nothing wrong. Now you don't want expert verification. I simply don't see why we need to escalate this. It's a waste of everyone's time. Humor me. Hayes was sweating now, his earlier confidence evaporating. Fine, fine. You want to know about page 47? I'll tell you the truth. He paused, seeming to gather himself. The notation is unconventional because I was working under time pressure. I had to submit the research quickly to meet application deadlines. I noticed the discrepancy, but realized it didn't affect the results, so I left it, rather than risk introducing new errors by changing it. Robert stared at him. So now it's not an intentional technique. It's a mistake you left in because you were rushed. Hayes's eye twitched. It's both. I noticed it evaluated, it decided it was acceptable. That's an intentional choice. But you just said the notation was a technique you developed during your doctoral work, a method you deliberately employed. Now you're saying you noticed it as a discrepancy and simply chose not to fix it. Which is it? You're twisting my words. I'm repeating them back to you. You can't keep your own story straight, Richard, because you're interrogating me like a criminal. Hayes slammed his hand on the table. I am not on trial here. I am the victim. This woman stole my work and is now trying to gaslight everyone into believing her version of events. Then explain the error, Robert said quietly. One simple question. What specifically is wrong with the notation on page 47, and why does it still produce valid results? You've now claimed it's both an intentional technique and an accidental discrepancy. So surely you can explain the actual mathematics. Hayes opened his mouth, closed it. His eyes darted to the paper, then to Robert, then to Naomi. The notation. He stopped, started again. In the context of the framework. You don't know, Naomi said softly. You can't explain it because you didn't write it. You don't understand why it works because you never developed the mathematical foundation. Shut up. Hayes's composure shattered completely. You think you're so clever, don't you, little scholarship girl with her perfect grades and her groundbreaking research? You had everything handed to you on a silver platter, and you still wanted more. I earned everything I had. You stole it. I made you. Hayes was on his feet now, his face contorted with rage. Without my guidance, your research would have been unfocused, undisciplined. I shaped your ideas, directed your analysis, refined your arguments. You were nothing but raw potential until I molded you into something useful. So you admit you had access to my work before it was published. Hayes froze, realizing what he had said. You just claimed you shaped my ideas and directed my analysis. How could you do that if I stole the research from you? If the work was originally yours, why would you need to guide me through it? The color drained from Hayes' face. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. Naomi stood slowly. You were my advisor. I sent you every draft, every revision, every piece of research I produced, and you took it. You took years of my work and claimed it as your own. This is a setup. Hayes looked wildly at Robert. She's manipulating this conversation, leading me into verbal traps. You can't seriously believe. Richard. Robert's voice cut through Hayes's panic. I'm going to ask you one more time. Explain the error on page 47. If you can give me a coherent mathematical explanation, I'll apologize, and we'll pretend this meeting never happened. Hayes stared at the paper. His hands were trembling. The notation represents a deviation from standard. Specifically, the coefficient adjustment allows for... What coefficient? What adjustment? Explain the mathematics, Richard. Silence. Long, damning silence. Hayes sank back into his chair. The fight seemed to drain out of him all at once, leaving behind a hollow shell of the confident man who had walked in an hour earlier. She was too good, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Her research was years ahead of anything I could produce. My career was stalling. Tenure review was coming up, and there it was in my inbox, draft after draft of brilliant work. All I had to do was take it. Naomi felt the room tilt around her. After 3 years of denial, 3 years of being called a liar and a thief, hearing him finally admit the truth felt surreal. You destroyed my life, she said, her voice shaking. You took everything I worked for and threw me away like garbage. 3 years. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? Hayes couldn't meet her eyes. I thought you would recover. You were young, talented. I assumed you would bounce back. With a plagiarism expulsion on my record, with my reputation destroyed in academic circles. Naomi's voice rose. I worked minimum wage jobs for 2 years. My mother almost died because I couldn't afford her medical care. All because you needed my work to save your career. I'm sorry. The words sounded hollow, inadequate. You're sorry. Naomi laughed bitterly. You're sorry. That's supposed to make up for everything. Robert pressed a button on his phone. Security, please escort Dr. Hayes from the property. His employment is terminated effective immediately. 2 guards entered the room. Hayes stood slowly, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Richard. Robert's voice stopped him at the door. My lawyers will be in contact. Miss Carter will receive compensation for the damage you've caused, and I'll be making calls to Columbia this afternoon. Her record will be corrected, and yours will be destroyed. Hayes left without another word. The door closed behind him, and silence filled the room. Naomi sank back into her chair, overwhelmed. 3 years of fighting, of being disbelieved, of carrying the weight of injustice. And now, in the space of an hour, it was over. The door burst open. Ethan rushed in, having watched the entire confrontation from the hallway. I knew it. He ran to Naomi and threw his arms around her. I knew you were telling the truth. Naomi held him tight, tears streaming down her face. You believed me. When no one else did, you believed me. You saved me first. Ethan pulled back to look at her. You taught me not to give up. I just did what you showed me. Robert watched them embrace, something shifting in his chest. His son, the angry, broken boy who had driven away 15 tutors, was crying tears of joy while defending someone he cared about. Miss Carter, Robert said quietly, I owe you an apology. I should have investigated before making my decision. I should have listened to your side with the same attention I gave to his." Naomi wiped her eyes. "You couldn't have known Mr. Callahan." "I could have tried to find out. Instead, I did exactly what Columbia did. I believed the person with power and dismissed the person without it." He paused. "That's not the kind of man I want to be." "Thank you," Naomi said softly, "for giving me the chance to be heard. That's all I ever wanted." 1 month after Hayes' confession, Naomi stood in the administrative building of Columbia University holding an envelope she had never expected to receive. Official notice of exoneration. All charges of academic misconduct have been vacated. Your academic record has been restored in full. Your degree will be conferred with honors. She read the words 3 times before they felt real. Robert had made good on his promise. His lawyers had contacted the university within days of Hayes' termination, presenting the evidence Ethan had gathered, along with Hayes' recorded confession. The school had launched an immediate investigation. Hayes' fabricated evidence fell apart under scrutiny. The manipulated timestamps were exposed. The altered emails were traced back to his university account. Worst of all for him, other students came forward with similar stories of stolen ideas and buried complaints. Richard Hayes was stripped of his tenure, his publications were retracted, and he was permanently banned from teaching at any accredited institution. Criminal charges for fraud were pending, but none of that mattered as much as the piece of paper in Naomi's hands. Her name was cleared. Her future was restored. She called her mother from the steps of the administration building, barely able to speak through her tears. "Mom, it's over. They cleared my record. I'm getting my degree." Grace Carter's voice crackled through the phone, weak but filled with joy. "Baby girl, I always knew you were innocent. I know you did, Mom. You never stopped believing. That's what mothers do." Naomi thought about Ethan, about the mother he had lost too young, about how Elizabeth had taught him to love learning and how that love had been buried under grief until Naomi helped him find it again. Everything connected. Everything came full circle. 2 weeks later, Naomi stood in her mother's hospital room, watching doctors prepare for a surgery they had almost lost hope of affording. Robert Callahan had written a check for $85,000 without hesitation. Naomi had tried to refuse. "Mr. Callahan, I can't accept this. It's too much." "It's not charity," Robert had insisted. "Consider it compensation. I fired you based on lies, nearly destroyed your chance to save your mother. This is the least I owe you. You don't owe me anything. You gave me a chance to prove my innocence. That's more than anyone else ever did. Take the money, Miss Carter. Your mother needs surgery. Don't let pride get in the way of her health." He was right, of course. Pride was a luxury Naomi couldn't afford. Now, watching the surgical team wheel her mother toward the operating room, Naomi felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. "I'll be right here when you wake up," she promised, squeezing her mother's hand. Grace smiled weakly. "I know you will, baby. You always are." The surgery lasted 6 hours. Naomi sat in the waiting room, unable to eat, unable to sleep, counting every minute. When the doctor finally emerged, his expression was calm. "The procedure was successful. Your mother is in recovery. She's going to be fine." Naomi broke down completely. 3 years of fear, of struggling, of watching her mother grow weaker while she could do nothing. All of it released in great heaving sobs of relief. Her mother was going to live. Everything else could wait. 3 months after her exoneration, Naomi walked into the Callahan Industries headquarters for a job interview. Robert had offered her a position directly. "After everything that's happened, it's the least I can do. I'll create whatever role suits your skills." Naomi had shaken her head. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan, but I don't want a job handed to me. If I'm going to work for your company, I want to earn it. You've already proven yourself 10 times over. To you, maybe, but I need to prove it to myself." She had met his eyes steadily. "I spent 3 years being told I wasn't good enough, that I was a fraud. If I take a shortcut now, part of me will always wonder if I deserved it." Robert had studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. When you're ready, apply through normal channels. I'll make sure you get a fair interview, nothing more." Now, 3 months later, she sat across from a panel of executives who had no idea about her history with the company's CEO. Her resume spoke for itself. Her Columbia degree restored her graduate research, properly attributed her references impeccable. The interview lasted 2 hours. They asked about her economic theories, her approach to sustainability, her vision for corporate responsibility. She answered every question with the confidence of someone who had survived the worst and emerged stronger. 2 weeks later, she received an offer letter, Junior Analyst, Department of Strategic Development, entry level, low salary, long hours. Perfect. She had earned it herself. That was all that mattered. That evening, Naomi drove to the Callahan estate to share the news with Ethan. She found him in the garden, sitting beneath the old oak tree with a book in his hands. The little prince, she observed, settling onto the grass beside him. Ethan looked up, his eyes slightly red. Dad gave it to me. He found Mom's copy in storage. She used to read it to me when I was little. Are you okay? Yeah. He closed the book gently. It's hard sometimes, reading the words she used to read, but it also feels like she's still here somehow. Like I can hear her voice. Naomi nodded. That's not a bad thing. No, it's not. He turned to face her. How did the interview go? I got the job. Ethan's face split into a grin. Seriously, that's amazing. He hugged her enthusiastically. I knew you would. You're the smartest person I know. I'm starting at the bottom. It'll be years before I work my way up to anything significant. So, you'll get there. You always do. Naomi smiled, touched by his faith in her. How about you? How's school? Better. Ethan picked at the grass. I'm actually studying now. Not because I have to, but because, I don't know. It doesn't hurt as much anymore. I'm glad. Dad and I have been talking more too. Real talking, not just him lecturing and me ignoring. He told me about when he first met Mom, how she was the one who taught him that money couldn't solve everything. Ethan's voice softened. I think losing her broke him, just as much as it broke me. He just showed it differently. Naomi reached over and squeezed his hand. Grief does strange things to people. Sometimes it pushes us apart from the ones we need most. Yeah. Ethan was quiet for a moment. He said he's proud of me, for not giving up on you, for fighting for what was right. His eyes glistened. I don't think he's ever said he was proud of me before. Not since Mom died. He means it. I know. Ethan wiped his eyes quickly. It's weird. Everything's different now. Good different, but still weird. Naomi looked up at the oak tree, its branches spreading wide against the evening sky. Change is always weird at first, but sometimes it's exactly what we need. 2 years later, the graduation ceremony was held on a perfect spring afternoon, sunlight streaming through the clouds onto rows of students in caps and gowns. Families filled the bleachers, cameras flashing, proud voices calling out names. Naomi sat in the third row, her mother beside her. Grace Carter was healthier than she had been in years, her cheeks full of color, her eyes bright with tears. There he is, Grace whispered, gripping Naomi's arm. Oh, look at him. Ethan Callahan walked across the stage to receive his diploma, his shoulders straight, his head held high. He had grown so much in 2 years, taller, broader, more confident. But his eyes still held that gentle warmth that Naomi remembered from their first conversation under the oak tree. He graduated with honors, top 10% of his class, accepted to Columbia University with a full academic scholarship. The boy who couldn't pass a math test was going to study economics at one of the best schools in the country. When his name was called, Naomi cheered louder than anyone. Grace had to hold her back from standing up and embarrassing herself completely. After the ceremony, Ethan found them in the crowd. He hugged Grace first, lifting the small woman off her feet. Congratulations, sweetheart, Grace said, patting his cheek. Your mother would be so proud. Thank you, Mrs. Carter. Ethan set her down gently and turned to Naomi. So what do you think? I think you've come a long way from the kid who threw orange juice at a tutor. Ethan laughed. Fair point. He grew more serious. I couldn't have done this without you. You know that, right? You did the work, Ethan. I just pointed you in the right direction. You did more than that. He pulled out a folded piece of paper from his pocket. I want you to hear something. This is the speech I gave at the Honors Assembly last week. He unfolded the paper and began to read. 3 years ago, I hated school. I hated learning. I hated everything that reminded me of the mother I had lost. I thought avoiding the pain would make it go away. I thought if I pushed everyone away, I couldn't get hurt again. Naomi felt tears building behind her eyes. Then I met someone who understood what it felt like to lose everything. She didn't lecture me or try to fix me. She just saw me. She saw through the anger and the acting out and the failed tests. She saw a kid who was hurting. Ethan looked up from the paper. She taught me that avoiding pain doesn't make it disappear. It just means you lose the beautiful things along with the painful ones. She taught me that learning isn't about grades or scores. It's about honoring the people who believed in us, even when they're no longer here. Grace was openly crying now, clutching Naomi's hand. She didn't have a teaching degree when she helped me. She was just a gardener. But she had something more important than any credential. She had the ability to see people for who they really were, not who everyone expected them to be. Ethan folded the paper and put it away. "That's you, Naomi. That's what you gave me." Naomi pulled him into a hug, not caring who was watching. "I'm so proud of you." "I'm proud of you too. Director of Sustainable Development, right? I heard you got promoted again." Naomi laughed through her tears. "Junior director. Don't get ahead of yourself. Give it another year. You'll be running the whole department." Later that evening, Naomi and Ethan walked through the garden of the Callahan estate one last time before he left for college. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. They stopped beneath the old oak tree, its branches heavy with summer leaves. "You know what's funny?" Ethan said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. "The school that expelled you is the same one that just accepted me." He held up his Columbia acceptance letter, grinning. Naomi shook her head. "Life has a strange sense of humor. I'm going to study economics, like you did. You'll do better than I did." Doubtful, Ethan tucked the letter away. "But I'm going to try something you taught me. I'm going to sign all my work, leave my mark, so if anyone ever tries to steal it, I can prove it's mine." Naomi's throat tightened. "You remembered that." "I remember everything you taught me." They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the wind rustle through the oak leaves. "This tree has seen a lot," Ethan said quietly. "You crying, me crying, both of us thinking we'd never be okay again. And now look at us. Now look at us." Ethan smiled. "You think it'll keep watching, keep seeing people at their worst and their best. It's been here for 200 years. I imagine it'll be here for 200 more." Naomi placed her hand on the rough bark. "And it'll keep watching people fall apart and put themselves back together again. That's kind of beautiful. That's kind of life." Robert appeared on the garden path, walking toward them slowly. He had aged in the past 2 years, more gray in his hair, more lines around his eyes. But there was a peace in his expression that hadn't been there before. "Room for one more?" he asked. Ethan moved to make space. Robert stood beside his son, looking up at the tree. "Your mother and I got engaged under this tree," Robert said quietly. "Did I ever tell you that?" Ethan shook his head. "She said yes before I even finished asking. Nearly gave me a heart attack." Robert's voice was thick with memory. "She loved this garden, spent more time out here than anywhere else in the house." "I know," Ethan said. "That's why I kept coming back, even when I was pushing everyone else away. This was where I felt closest to her." Robert put his arm around his son's shoulders. "She would be so proud of you, the man you're becoming, the person you fought to be." "I had help." Ethan glanced at Naomi. "We both did." Robert extended his hand to Naomi. "Thank you for everything you've done for my family." Naomi shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for giving me a second chance. Both of you." The three of them stood together as the sun sank below the horizon, the sky fading from gold to purple to deep blue. Fireflies began to emerge, tiny points of light dancing among the flowers. "You know what my mom used to say?" Naomi said softly. "She used to say that kindness always comes back to the person who gives it. I never really believed her until now." "What changed your mind?" Ethan asked. Naomi looked at him, this boy who had been so broken when she first saw him, now standing tall and whole and ready to face the world. "You did," she said. "You believed in me when no one else would. You fought for me when everyone else had given up. You showed me that the kindness I gave wasn't wasted. It just took time to find its way back." Ethan smiled. "Then I guess we're even." "I guess we are." The fireflies danced around them as night settled over the garden. Somewhere in the distance, a nightingale began to sing. And beneath the ancient oak tree, 3 people who had once been broken stood together, whole at last.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.